All right. First off, let me say thank you for joining me and taking the time to speak to me today about articling, the minimum wage articling for minimum wage for articling students. And maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the Law Students Society of Ontario.
Sure. Thanks so much, Joseph, for having us. My name is Enbar. I'm the president at the Law Student Society of Ontario, the LSSO. We are an organization that is effectively governed by law students. So we're comprised of all Ontario law student governments, representatives from law student governments across the province, who are elected by their respective student bodies. And that council, comprised of those representatives, effectively elects the executive, comprised of myself, VP Internal, External, and Equity Officer.
Okay.
And we also have an advisory board, which has been helping us maintain continuity year over year.
Year over year. So let me ask then, it's the Ontario law schools only, and it's 8 law schools, right? That's all that we have in Ontario?
Exactly. We're in the process of adding even more representation from U Ottawa as well, and across in the entire province, trying to maximize our.
And when you say representation, you mean law students or the chapters of the law student associations that are within each school? Can you maybe explain that a little?
Yeah, definitely. So that is the approach we take. So in order to ensure that we're operating under an elected regime, we have council members appointed by each of the Ontario Law School student governments. So the law student governments function as our council, and therefore they operate as an elected council because their student bodies elect them.
Now, do they elect an individual that's going to represent them with the LSSO, or is it the president of each of those associations that gets elected?
Yeah, generally it's the president that sits on the LSSO. We have sometimes the VP advocacy or the VP finance joining them, and most law schools have 2 seats. So there's room for the president plus another vice president.
Oh, wow. So you got at least 16 people plus your executive board or your group.
Yeah, we're quite a big group.
Oh, interesting. It's amazing how you can get 20 lawyers in a room and see if 2 can agree on anything. It's awesome. It looks like the issue we'll be talking about today, there's some agreement on. So, before we dive into that, I just wanted to understand how many, so what kind of student makeup, and is there a deference given to, let's say, Osgoode, if they have the largest class size versus, let's say, Windsor with a smaller class size, or Lakehead with a smaller class size? How does that work? Or is it just strictly 1 vote per individual that's on the committee? How does that, if you don't explain that?
Yeah, definitely. So it does work proportionally. So law schools that have a significantly larger amount of students get an extra vote, and it's all fleshed out in our constitution. So every time it comes down to a vote, we make sure that it's aligned well with the proportional approach that we take. And so the result is that U Ottawa ends up getting a couple more votes, but generally, at least from in the past couple of years that I've been involved, there hasn't been much controversy about the votes and the issues that we discuss, just because there's generally quite a bit of consensus among law schools.
So there's no impeachment proceedings or anything like that since you've seen your time there?
Yeah, no, thankfully not.
Good to know. Good. What's the population sizes right now? Like how many total students do we know are graduating from law schools, the 8 law schools? Because there's also NCAs, right? Foreign trained, lawyers that are coming in and want to be licensed. But let's deal with just Ontario. Do you know how many are currently?
That's a good distinction there. So we don't represent the NCAs. We do try to gain some insight and feedback from NCAs, but we exclusively represent I believe 4,500 or just under 5,000 undergraduate law students in the province. And obviously, a third of that generally is the cohort that's graduating and entering the profession.
So somewhere in the range of 15 to 1700 students, roughly.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And what about the NCA side? Are they organized? Or is there an association or a group that advocates on behalf of the NCA students that you're aware of? I know that that may not be a question that you're aware
Yes,
of.
we're trying to identify. We're in the process of working towards identifying more of a central group. So far, we're tapping into some networks, but our approach, because the NCA approach is really broad internationally, we're trying to just identify individual NCAs and try to, through them, hear what are other NCAs thinking, what's their approach, what are their thoughts on particular issues. But generally, our focus is on Ontario law students.
And when do you first touch the first Ontario law schools? Is it first year that they are given an email or an introduction to the LSSO? Is that what happens? Maybe you can explain a little bit of that so I can understand.
So we have started this protocol in the past couple of years, started by my predecessors, called the Roadshow, where we collaborate with the LSO, and I on purpose pronounce the letters to not mix it up.
Mhm.
So we collaborate with the LSO to bring insight specifically for 1Ls, but as well for students who may have missed it in prior years about what both the LSSO does and the LSO in terms of their current involvement and their future involvement with the LSO. And that happens generally at the beginning of the year. So that's usually when 1Ls will get an introduction. And we have a mailing list of over 1,500 participants and a significantly large social media following as well. So that's really how we reach out to most students.
Yeah, I would imagine social media and maybe Facebook groups seem to be a big thing now, though I don't know what the uptake is like for Facebook groups in your generation. So new lawyers. What's the social media following, if you don't mind me asking? Is it something that drops off? Is it big in the initial? What are some of the numbers?
Yeah, it's constantly growing. We're just under 3,000 followers on Facebook at the moment. And the advantage of being comprised by a council of law student government representatives is that we also leverage the law student societies at each law school to amplify the advocacy or the feedback effort, or rather the feedback solicitation effort. So in addition to our own centralized accounts, we also leverage each law student government to reach out on their own, on our behalf.
That's great. That's awesome. So you're pretty much keeping everyone that wants to be in the know up to date. And okay, great. And so tell me, how long has the LSSO been around? And what was the vision from your knowledge always been advocating for the rights of students?
So I believe we're going on 8 years now. And in the past few years, I think we've grown to be somewhat more standard, or the degree of continuity year over year in terms of the projects and the priorities that the LSSO takes has managed to maintain itself, primarily as a result of a new um, governance effort that we've placed, the advisory board, which is comprised of presidents and previous representatives that now fit into the strategic approach that the LSSO takes and ensures that projects don't get dropped.
Yeah, that's good. So it's a little more continuity. You've got your footing, and then you're looking at how to grow and stabilize, which is always fun. So I wanted to get into a little bit more about maybe your background, how much you're comfortable sort of talking a little bit about yourself and what made you decide to run for the position that you're in now. I'm assuming it was a process that you had to run for, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and how that worked out for you.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a U Ottawa law student, and the pandemic really was an opportunity that I saw to contribute to law student government and take the opportunity to contribute in a positive light to student wellness and student life. And I initially got involved within my campus on the Law Student Society, and as a result, ended up serving on the LSSO as a council member. And I saw an opportunity to leverage my abilities and interests in student government passion to bring even more positive change to students. And one of the really the big goals that I had, in addition to law student advocacy and increasing dialogue, was wellness. And Headspace is the
Yeah, I
Headspace
saw
initiative.
that. So I was reading up a little bit about your, online, and I saw that there was an initiative to bring Headspace into. Now, I don't know if it was all the law schools or just it started at Ottawa and then moved to. Maybe tell me a little bit about that. That was to sort of help. That was pandemic specific.
Yeah, so it started in just after 1L, where I joined the student government and led the pilot of Headspace at U Ottawa. And when I joined the LSSO, I saw an opportunity to leverage the amazing network that the LSSO has to connect the law schools and make the program cheaper for all students. And so what now happens is every law school that is interested, and now we're sitting at just about half of all of Ontario law schools, partaking in the Headspace program and slowly going up from that. And what it does, it effectively offers every student that's interested within the participating law schools a free premium Headspace account. And I can tell you the feedback that we've been receiving from students that use the service is really phenomenal, especially around OCI time and exam season, where you
Yeah.
just learn to leverage your breath and your ability to just be mindful of what's going on in life to lower that stress.
That's amazing. So it's something obviously you must have tried and felt strong about and push that for the benefit of everyone else. That's great. That's
Yeah,
great.
sometimes a bit of breathing is really strong.
I think that's a big thing now. I think it's really taken off. People have had to find strategies and tools to deal with elements of life that we weren't, accustomed to dealing with. And so that's a
Yeah,
big thing.
especially being at home with the pandemic, and you're to some degree isolated. Quite a few students have found themselves isolated, and you don't have the social networks to keep the stress level down, and so you need to find alternative avenues, and Headspace has offered that for quite a few students.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Um, Tell me a little bit about, just to switch gears, tell me a little bit about, you were on the involved with the law school show. Maybe tell some of the viewers a little bit about that, and you can get a better sense for what that is.
Sure. Yeah, personally, not related to the LSSO. I'm a host at the law school show, which started out in Ottawa and is now expanded to have hosts from across the province. And we really just cover any and every topic that students might be interested to hear about, from the insight of professionals about their practice to the change that the pandemic has had, and just generally law student life and different things to consider. So it's just an exciting opportunity to reach students.
For each students, and has it picked up? It's been, how long has it been going, and what's the traction like? If you're getting feedback, you tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's receiving thousands of views and listens, and I believe it received a Klobby just last year, which
Yeah,
was exciting.
nice.
Uh, Yeah, so it's growing, and as more hosts join, obviously the network and the amount of viewers grow, because you have more hosts taking part and their communities tuning in. So I can foresee it becoming bigger and bigger, and I think we're starting to even get an audience in the States as well. So it's exciting.
Oh, wow, that's pretty awesome. So you've seen that over the last, and so you've hosted the show. Is it both a podcast and a video, or is it just the podcast?
Right now, it's primarily a podcast, and I'll give the credit to the producers. I'm just one of the many hosts, but the
Yeah.
producers do a phenomenal job at continuing to grow and keep the show alive, because at the end of the day, it's run by students, so it's that transition year over year that keeps it going.
Oh, that's great, man. That's really good to hear. And that sort of led me to another article I read online about you that mentioned a little bit of entrepreneurship, that you are, there seemed to be a little bit of a bug or a spark of entrepreneurship there. Maybe, I know this is not specific LSSO stuff, so maybe you can tell me a little bit about that on your end, and then we can get back to some other stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So in undergrad, I started a bit of a content creation company focused on helping small businesses manage their social media and Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and during the pandemic, that really proved a service that a lot of small businesses needed to reach new audiences. And so I started it up and kept it going throughout law school. And just recently, actually, I've started another venture focused on bringing blogging services to law firms, and specifically offered by law students. So kind of offering law students an opportunity to hone their writing skills, but also get some cash for it.
Oh, that's great. I think I shared with you before, before today, that I've had a little bit of blogging experience myself, and I found that once you're dialed in, it really becomes a fun process of being able to share, and try to translate what's in the legal world and put it into plain English for a would-be client, to understand. And I think a lot of the older lawyers are getting it now, but initially were hesitant with social media, hesitant with sharing their feelings, or taking risque photos of themselves, or singing and dancing online, and even to the point of blogging for worry of saying something that might be used against them, or for all these other fears. And what I found with the blogging was fabulous. It opened up a whole new world of marketing. It opened up a whole new conversation and community of people that started to follow me from my own personal experience. And so hats off. Congratulations on sort of launching that. I think it's a great way to even get, some law students introduced to lawyers that might find that helpful and a need for the future, and potentially open up positions for them.
Yeah, definitely. And students are, I think, in a great position to offer firms that insight on what the layman's view is on your practice, because you're still not fully part of the profession. So you might have some insight into what others might be interested to hear about.
Yeah, and I guess so. If I had to sort of jump into this, I should say, as a caveat, I'm a Law Society of Ontario bencher, but I'm not here or promoting any of the views of the Law Society, right? I think as a lawyer, I probably should say that these are my own personal views and discussions that we're having. Now that the cautionary note is sort of dealt with. Can you tell me a little bit about what you saw from the roadshow? Were you in the roadshow this year with the treasurer, and I'm assuming she had some others help along the way? And what was the feedback from the students? And are the students divided into groups? Do you see some that are engaging and enjoying, and others that are distant and distrustful? Or what are you seeing in general? Maybe you can tell me a little bit about that.
So I think the roadshow itself was quite a success, and continues to be, in terms of educating students about what the LSO does. On a different note, we have this tool that we've developed within the LSO, sort of a feedback form that we consistently circulate around the province for students to fill out. And that's where we really get quite a lot of our insight into what students are thinking, beyond the relaying of dialogue that's happening on campus through council. And that's really where we see the most diversity in terms of opinions and insights. And I think, and I guess I'll caveat as well with the same note that you made, is most of what I'll try to discuss today will try to reflect the different insights that students have been sharing with us. And I'll try to avoid my own opinions, although I'm still a student, so I'll toss them wherever I have an opportunity. But the goal is really to share where students are at. And so when it comes to the LSO, we're hearing quite a bit of frustration from students, specifically when it comes to fees, when it comes to certain policies. But one of the big ones is generally just having formal involvement within the LSO is something that students want to see more of, and we're seeing some great progress this year. PDNC, which I guess we'll jump into a little later, invited us to discuss and chat about the upcoming policy changes. And so we are seeing some progress, but I think students are undoubtedly concerned about the degree of formal voice that students have.
Interesting. As a student, it was a while ago for me, but I can remember that there was so much going on. There were so many things to sort of stress and worry about, both from getting a handle on studies, marks, and career, opportunities, and sort of, being involved with things that mattered to you, that stepping into the political arena and trying to have a voice at the LSO just seemed like that much more of a hill to climb. I'm happy to hear you guys have started, a platform to give students a voice, and so hats off to you on that, and glad you're involved. I do know. I know PDNC did have you, not you, but your predecessor involved. Have heard from them, and was glad to hear that. And I know that we were listening intently. If I could sort of generally say what my feel or impression was from the benchers.
Yeah, and I will add as well that we're quite thankful. There's a lot of LSO staff that are quite fantastic in terms of keeping us in the loop and actively engaging with us and touching base about what students are concerned about, from the practical things, like the bar exams and technical difficulties, and really issues that students are just going on Facebook and messaging us about, and we're relaying to staff directly. So that's a really nice kind of bridge that we've slowly cultivated with LSO staff over the years, and that's really the shift that I think students are hoping continues to grow.
And how much do the students understand about the structure of the LSO? So do they understand how the Law Society is structured? Do they understand what convocation and the benchers are? Because, when I was running for the position of bencher, I had conversations with different lawyers, and there were some that were in their first 3 or 4 years had no clue, at all what it was and what we did and what the Law Society did, from a bencher standpoint or governance standpoint. And I'm just wondering what you've seen, if that's anything in the questionnaires or comments that you get.
Yeah, it is something that the treasurer often notes and explains in the roadshow. But maybe if you have a few seconds to give the audience a kind of insight
Okay.
on what convocation might be.
Well, for any students listening, I'd say it's much like a board of directors, although it's a more quasi-regulatory, given the regulatory nature of policies that are set. And basically, it's a board of 53 individuals, maybe 54 with the attorney general, but let's say there's 53. 5 of those directors or benchers are lay persons appointed, so non-lawyers appointed by the Ontario government. Sorry, 8, my mistake. 8 are lay persons appointed by the government. 5 are paralegals, and 40 are lawyers. And of that 40, 20 are from within Toronto, and 20 are outside of Toronto. So the rest of Ontario, broken up by areas, or regions. And basically, it's a monthly board meeting, give or take, a month here or there. And there are a bunch of committees that are struck to examine, debate, discuss, review, and give opinions on information relating to policies. One policy is the one that we're talking about today, which is should articling students be paid a mandatory minimum wage, right? And that's an example of one of the issues that came up in a policy discussion at one of our committees.
Yeah, and I think when issues like these arise from time to time, students get quite a bit more involved and tend to voice their opinions a bit more. So I guess this is that time of the decade or the few years where students are more active than they may have been in the past.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think, when we were in law school, there wasn't the same level of encouragement to sort of speak up. I mean, social media wasn't in existence, and there was now that seems to be a very given fact that you are okay to share your opinion and share your voice, whether some agree or disagree with you, but share it unabashedly and be yourself. And I think that's a great thing that's come out of it. It also comes with a lot of battles online, things that you probably wouldn't say to each other face to face. But we're learning as we go, and I think it's great that students are have at least a place and a voice in this whole process. So great, good stuff.
And I guess on that topic that you brought up, the minimum wage, maybe we can briefly note some context that I was eager to paint to students, because I think a lot of students are not aware that the legal profession, in addition to a few other professions, are kind of exempted from the Employers Standard Act. I believe that's the name.
Yeah, the Employment Standards Act specifically excludes law students.
And so the students that are aware of it quite often reach out to us, kind of trying to share their voice and view that as a result of that exemption, it's really the Lsso that has the duty to protect.
I think that's the question, right? There used to be that, while you've coming out of law school, technically you're a lawyer. You may not be a licensed lawyer, but if you graduated law school, you're a lawyer. And for the most part, you were you were held up socially, but you were also considered to be in the upper echelon of the more powerful positions in society. That power position, though, when dealing with other lawyers for jobs, would you say that there's a power imbalance, or would you say it's pretty equal? I mean, in every position or every industry that you're in, would it be fair to argue maybe the best of the best are sought after by employers, and then it sort of works its way down from there, or is there no power imbalance at all and everyone's got an equal slate and an opportunity? What are you hearing from students?
Yeah, so from the insights that we're getting, students generally, and I think quite a few lawyers that we've been engaging with, view licensing candidates as essentially the most vulnerable group within the profession, because students are not yet within the profession and lawyers are the profession. And so you have that middle ground where, as it stands right now, licensing candidates need something from the profession. They need their articling. They need their pathway to licensure. And so as a result, there is an inherent imbalance. When you need something and there are X regulations, students will abide by them because they need it. And I think something interesting that a few students noted to me is that they, before kind of learning about this issue and that the way the Lsso works, they didn't know that lawyers are exempt from the ESA, and they kind of viewed it as like, that makes sense. It's the legal profession, it's the guardians of justice, quote unquote. And so if there is an industry that's exempt from the ESA, it would be the legal profession, because they probably have standards way beyond what the general small business industry or licensing structure might offer. And quite a lot of them are expressed to me a bit of shock when they learn that it's a bit of the opposite, in terms of there's less just approach to, I guess they call just, but less regulation around articling.
Certainly, there's no shortage of opinions around, even at the Law Society. From my impression, there seems to be the group that is pro members versus some that are pro public interest, others that are pro regulation, increased regulation, and others that are focused on reducing regulation and allowing sort of more of a free market approach. And that divide kind of shows itself. It's not an easily addressed issue, when aligning. But let's get into the law students a little and their thoughts on whether this is the responsibility of the LSO. This is something that the LSO should regulate and should, push for a mandatory minimum wage. And will that solve all the problems? What are some of when they complain about the approach, what is it that they're looking for? Is it looking for more positions or a different approach or less fees? What are some of the things you've heard?
So I'll give a quick context about it before I share the insights. So just for context, for those listening, the minimum wage effectively would come out to be 23,000 for the 10-month articling window. For students carrying $100,000+ in debt, which is crazy to even say.
Yeah, let's get into that. So law school tuition is in the $25,000, $20,000 to $25,000 range now. Is that about right?
Right. Yeah,
And that doesn't include undergraduate either.
Doesn't include undergrad, doesn't include licensing fees, which are quite often more than double the general fees. So you got quite a bit of debt carrying. And so when you're looking at 23,000 figure, which is the minimum wage approach, even in that light, if you take the unfortunate group of students who may not have the resources from their family, housing is in and of itself a problem to now maintain, let alone the interest on the debt. So not even talking about paying down the debt, just maintaining the debt at that point, it becomes almost impossible if you don't have the resources from your family. And at the end of the day, if you have dependents and if you have anybody else, at that point you might have to tell yourself, okay, I'm just not gonna do this, or I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna risk the health and well-being of my family. And that is the extreme cases. But I think it is important to recognize that this issue is really touching only the extreme cases, because the majority of students are not going to be impacted by the minimum wage, and the majority of placements are not going to be impacted by the minimum wage. And so what we're hearing from students kind of in an overwhelming fashion is this sort of importance of placing a student's well-being at the forefront of the regulatory approach to articling, in addition to obviously the core objective of training, but ensuring that at that point when your OSAP cuts out and your line of credit from the bank is no longer available because you're not a student, it's now the LSO's place to ensure that you have the means to buy food. And students who find themselves in the position of doing an unpaid or underpaid placement are finding it hard.
And do you lose that qualification? It's been a while, but with OSAP, do you lose that qualification while you're a student at law articles, or or does that kick in after that you lose that? When does that? Do you know? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, for sure. OSAP payments kick in about 6 months after you graduate. So I'd say that comes out to about 3 months into an articling term, you'd start paying your OSAP payments. And that's if you don't have your line of credit from the banks, which thankfully they give you a somewhat of a grace period before it transitions to a loan, but you already have your interest payments and you have everything that comes with no longer being a student.
Yeah. And do you guys track, or do you in your surveys, do you ask how many are in debt, let's say above a certain amount or below a certain amount? Is that something you guys look at when you're sending out surveys and things?
Yeah, so we are actually right now undertaking a massive national tuition study, which we hope will be finalized by the end of this year. There's been delays in terms of the amount of responses. We want to make sure that the data is sufficiently comprehensive, but the idea here is to paint a clear picture of what that looks like for law students, so that we can then go to the appropriate bodies and say, look, this is not sustainable. It's law students literally can't make it out of school without worrying about survival. Now, again, this isn't talking about the fortunate individuals who
It's
have
not
the,
everyone. Yeah, I totally get that. It's
yeah,
not everyone, and it's really those that are in maybe a smaller percentage, but it is applicable, and if you're in that situation, it does hurt. So sounds like that there could be potential campaigns targeted at government and at banks and OSAP to try to help them understand the changing landscape, or the changed landscape, from 15 years ago to today, where OSAP and some of the financing terms that were workable back then may not work so much now for law students. So very good, very interesting. I'm
yeah,
glad to hear.
definitely going to lay the foundations for that kind of advocacy for sure. Because at the end of the day, it's not the LSO that mandates tuition rates, and that's the government. So that's really where the advocacy is going to go. But when it comes to a living wage, or rather a minimum wage, which isn't necessarily a living wage, that really comes down to the LSO's mandate.
So we got into it in a couple of the benches, and I had our podcast. We talked a little bit about some of the issues, and if I recall correctly, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but if I recall correctly, it was 10 to 15% of the total articling student cohort each year that don't get or are struggling to get articling positions, and I think the number was 2,700 students in general. So that would include NCAs, that would include, the 8 law schools, excuse me, and so 10% being somewhere in the range of 300, 3 to 400, 3 to 500, depending on the numbers in a given year that don't get positions, right? And I guess for me, I'm trying to understand in terms of the biggest priority or the biggest concern for students. It's one thing to say, yeah, we're concerned about all these things, which is good, but what is your sense, or the LSSO sense, of what is the top priority? Is it getting a job? Is it managing the debts? Is it experiential training and the learning? Is it the experience of articling? Because learning may be great, but you may not enjoy the experience of articles. They've been known to be emotional for many. Looking back, I can, sort of attest to some of that, right? So what are you getting as a sense in general?
Yeah, so it is dangerous to kind of combine everybody into one group, because as you suggest, there's a diverse amount of students from different backgrounds, different resources. What we're hearing generally as the primary concern is finances. The students are super worried about finances and about sustaining the debt load that they have. And quite often the students that are ending up in the position that is underpaying them are those same students that are concerned about how they're going to pay off their debts. I think it is on the numbers that you noted, it is important to note that there is the LPP program, which is thankfully there to offer alternative approaches to licensure, and the LSO is doing a great job at slowly bringing that into more of the mainstream, and students are, I think, starting to consider it. And in terms of the numbers of unpaid and unpaid or underpaid placements, I believe from what we're hearing from the LSO, it's sitting at around 150 plus minus 50 placements that are either unpaid or underpaid. So when you put that into the grand scheme of things, it isn't most placements. It's about, as you suggested, 10 to 15% of placements, but that's a significant number, especially if quite a large group within that are marginalized and come from less fortunate means.
I think that's fair. I mean, I know from what it appeared to me that there was a the Law Society had a report of 2018, and then they looked at that and sort of did more discussions and came out with a newer report, which I'm sure you've seen. It was online, and my impression, again, not speaking on behalf of anyone specifically, is that there was a focus at the overall experience of of the articling placement, the articling student at the placement, versus a priority for job opportunities and or licensure. And so like there were some that some views that believe that if you brought in a minimum wage, you might be making it more difficult for those that are in that 10% from finding someone willing to take them on. There are anecdotal stories of lawyers that are, you know, touched on and hired or taken on articling students when they didn't have the means to do so, and maybe paid them a bonus every month, or you know, looked at honorariums, or really just couldn't do it at all. Solos and smalls that couldn't afford to make those payments. And I think no one wanted to take that opportunity away. You know, as emotional as articles can be, there is a gratitude that comes from someone who's helped you, you know, get your articles and get your license. Dangerous though. I mean, I don't think anybody should be working for free, fundamentally.
Yeah, so that there's a few points that exactly on that topic that students have been sharing, and there's a bit to unpack. So the first piece I think is important to note that the previously approved minimum wage, the structure of it, that it was taking on, again, not, it wasn't implemented yet, so the proposals um, carved in an opportunity for exemption. So placements that were of high quality, such as nonprofits, NGOs, or other placements that PDNC would have kind of carved into it, would offer an exemption in situations where there just isn't the ability to pay, but the placement is still high quality. And that's something to look at.
So that sounds great. I, you know, if I was approached with someone and I couldn't pay, I'm wondering if I would have qualified as high quality. Facetiously, I don't know, but that's interesting. That's great to hear. Go on. I didn't want to cut you off. I
Yeah,
apologize.
so that's one piece. I guess there's two more pieces. One of the other ones is that at the end of the day, recognizing that these students are or candidates are the most vulnerable of the profession, um, by not mandating a minimum wage, it functions to some degree. You could argue that, but it functions as a tacit approval of saying, like, if you can't pay articling students, will accept that you don't pay them as long as you take them. And if I'm thinking as someone that's running a firm with the bottom line generally being profits, if you can find some students who will you know, fill in the gaps. I appreciate that it's not easy to be a principal, and most of the time you're probably spending training, so you're losing probably as a principal. But a few months into it, 3-4 months into training, at that point, I presume preparing minute books, filling out forms, contacting clients, doing intake, all those general tasks are pretty much trained a month into articling. And at that point, I think it's important to recognize that if it's a for-profit machine, it's going to leverage the regulations available to it to maximize profit, especially if, and I hope to one day be in sole practice, if I have no means to pay, but someone is looking for it, then I can see how that could happen. I personally think that every firm should be paying, whether or not there is a regulation to pay, but I can see how some firms might take advantage. And I think on that note, it's interesting. Another student recently reached out and dropped this link to a recent Nobel Prize that was awarded to economists, 3 economists, David Card and among another 2,
Yeah.
who demonstrated empirically, effectively, that the long time theory that minimum wages just destroy jobs isn't necessarily fact. And that's something that a lot of students are slowly turning their minds to, that those 150 placements may or may not disappear. That is, they may disappear. And that's something that I think students are mindful of, and it's important to recognize that may happen. But it's definitely a potential. And that, from what we're hearing from students, doesn't justify unpaid articling
Okay, interesting. So with that you just read, maybe you can send me the link afterwards. I'll put it in the in the notes of the for the comment section, and anyone can access it. I know that there are some that sort of look at Thomas Sowell and his comments about what happened in the U.S. and the Black community when minimum wage was mandated by the governments, and the impacts that it had on jobs. I always love to read new stuff, so that'd be great. And anyone watching or listening that wants to go and check it out, if you're comfortable, send it over, and I'll include it in the link. I don't think in general that there's anyone. So let me say this. I'm sure there are individuals that will probably take advantage of someone in order to get free work. I would like to think the large majority have come out of the school of thought that were trained by our mentors, who were trained by their mentors and their mentors and their principals, that giving back is part of the profession. This theme seems to be prevalent among the law firms and the lawyers that at least I know, and that's a small bubble, but there is a respect and a sense of duty to give back and to take on articling students if you can. I take your point about the minute books and some of the other work. I think with litigators it might be a little different. I certainly know that after 20 years out, I can do something in an hour that it would take someone else that's just starting out longer. But I think it's a fair comment. I don't know that anyone would be taking advantage of specifically. I mean, I can probably count on one hand anyone that I know that had articling students work for free. And ones I've had, I've never worked for free, and I've always paid them. But I guess it's is the impression that there are big bad lawyers that want to take advantage of and try to force you to work for free. And would this, would you make more, is the fear I have is that if you set out a minimum wage, would that be the automatic new position? Well, Law Society said minimum wage, so that's all you're getting, obviously not the same with downtown firms, the large national firms, but what's the impression that you're seeing on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, on a personal level as well, from my experience, every mentor that I've had within the profession has been exactly as you described. The last person that I think to take advantage of an articling student would be a lawyer. But at the end of the day, students are expressing their concerns, and some of them involve that if there isn't that regulation, it's inevitable that some firms will hop onto it. And so when it comes to the implications of a minimum wage, whether it's on jobs or on the starting base salary for students, it's always going to be speculation. And I could speculate that it might have an impact, it might not. Those who currently have a placement with a paying approach may raise it or may lower it to minimum wage. But I don't have the data to kind of confirm.
So you think the sort of happy medium would be somewhere in the and I'm throwing this out, but throwing this out there, an articling situation where there's a mandatory minimum wage and an exemption process for anyone that is looking to apply for an exemption because they can't find how do we address the bottleneck of 200 to 350 students that need jobs that can't find articling positions? Would that be one? And what do you think of perhaps reducing Lsso fees for giving a break or discounts on fees to articling principals in those situations?
Yeah, I think that any approach the Lsso could take to incentivize firms to take on more placements should be taken, with the caveat that the students shouldn't be expected to work for free. I think that, again, based on what students are expressing to us, that is something that they're looking to see standardized. And you can see that in other professions they're exempted from the ESA, such as doctors, for example. I believe that their residency structure has a minimum salary of 60,000.
Mhm.
Again, different industry, different parameters, different factors, but another profession that's exempted that has a minimum, and you still have um, outgoing medical students that can't find residency. You know, it's not a problem that is exclusive to the legal profession, but I think that the minimum wage issue is to some degree viewed as a universally important um, aspect
Hmm.
that to be tackled in other avenues, which I think we look forward as the Lsso to be consulted on additional avenues that can be taken to solve the
Yeah.
problem that is inherent within articling. But I think students don't view unpaid placements as the solution.
Yeah, I don't know that that's the standard, for the majority, but I get the doctor's example, but there's a different billing structure and a collecting structure there.
Government,
And that I get that. On the articling position side, the vast majority, I shouldn't say that. I'll say the majority of articling positions are in solo and small firms of 10 persons or less. There are a large number that go to large firms and mid-sized firms, but a good chunk of the majority go to the smaller firms. And so some of them may not be able to afford them. Some may not have the skills necessary to run a business. They may be in solo practice. And some of those issues are kind of difficult to sort of deal with, but they want to help. They want to potentially try, and sometimes that depending on what regulations go in, I think that could be the concern was it could either cause more of a bottleneck or it could make it worse in general. And so tough, not an easy discussion to have, because ultimately the opposite of the opposite opinion is sort of saying, well, we should allow articling students to volunteer. And really, nobody believes, no one at Convocation, from my impression, believes that articling students should work for free or volunteer. No one. And that's been consistent, throughout. So it's an interesting debate. I wonder how the Lsso might police it. And I can see a regime where perhaps they would let on special permission, grant an exemption so that the lawyer or the candidate would write in requesting it. But then you get into a situation where the Lsso comes in, looks at your law firm, checks your revenue, judges you on your ability to run a business, may look at your finances and what you take home, and decide that perhaps you don't fit the bill for an exemption. In that case, I don't think any lawyer is going to be happy. No one wants the big bad regulator coming to them and saying, "Hey, show us your books."
yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
but I think to some degree that would function in the way that other industries work, in the sense that the minimum wage is mandated, and it's up to the businesses to follow it. And when there's an issue, then it will likely be flagged by hopefully it'll be flagged by the individual who is now not being paid.
Mhm.
Uh, but I presume also the approach, however, the Lsso managed to identify how many placements are underpaid. I don't know what methods they use to come up with that data, but the methods could probably be leveraged to keep insight into what's going on post minimum wage.
So if you had any students say, "No, I'm okay with it. Like, let me choose on my own. I'll negotiate my own, contract. I don't need a mandatory minimum wage," and
So
that
we,
kind of.
we were surprisingly, we were expecting quite a few. So far, an overwhelming amount of students have only expressed their kind of worries about the fact that there isn't a minimum wage. And I think it's important to note that a lot of students don't know that. They don't know that until they finish or they're about to graduate, and now they're looking for articling positions, and they're seeing posts online saying, 200 a week or 150 a week or unpaid. And then they're like, wow, I didn't know that this was even possible within my profession.
Can't live on that. That's just crazy. What about the Employment Standards Act? Any discussions about trying to lobby the government on changing the act to add law students in there?
So far, we haven't brainstormed on that front, and I think part of the reason is I think there's a lot of benefits to have the legal profession self-regulated. Despite the minimum wage issue, I think there's a lot of advantages to having the profession contribute to its own governance. Because from my experience, which is quite limited as I'm still a student, but it seems to be a very unique profession that requires very nuanced approach to the regulations. And so I think that just consuming the profession within the ESA would be again, this is my personal view, would cause potentially more harm than good.
So
Uh,
nothing that you're aware of that's sort of ongoing in terms of actively pursuing government lobbying to try to have that moved in there or taken in there.
Not yet, but you know that that's a great opportunity for us to start collecting some feedback from students, because who knows, maybe the majority of students, if not all, will think that that's the approach that the LSSO should take going forward, because maybe that is a solution to have the profession in the long term just operate under the ESA.
Any, there are some there's some that talked about the worry that you'd have to, resurrect the whole Ministry of Labor, apparatus, department around, policing something like the minimum wage, and then a whole appeal process or a, discipline process around that. And the concern being that the increased regulation would then increase the overall fees that go to some of the lawyers. Obviously, some of those lawyers will be students that will be lawyers in the years that come. And so I guess the concern was, it might be a touch of over regulation. And I don't think there's been much of a discussion of that in general online or in social media or in the supports. But have you heard anything at all come about from that type of a discussion?
Not generally from students, apart from the continued approach that students, when we do try to elicit those areas, go back to what really is at the heart of it, and they remind us, as the executive, they remind us, listen, if I have dependents and I have no option, I have to do to get my articling. Um, how do I support my family on less than a minimum wage, if that? And so even when there are some hurdles, I think it's really the LSO's, or at least what students view, it's the LSO's duty to find a solution other than um, to allow for unpaid internships and articling placements, and that might look like um, you know growing the LPP program. It might look like giving, as you suggest, incentives to firms, and in terms of policing, it might look like less policing. But I think the mere fact of um, mandating the minimum wage will go a long way in terms of elevating the amount of properly paid placements, regardless of whether or not they're policed.
Interesting. So what I'm hearing and is that it's more of a give us financial certainty at a minimum. We can negotiate up from there, but a minimum financial certainty, and leave the opportunity finding to us. We'll go out and find our opportunities, find our articling positions. We'll deal with it as long as there's a mechanism in the worst case scenario that we need some kind of an exemption or an exemption process. Ultimately, if we're stuck or we don't get into the LPP process with Ryerson or Lakehead or whatever it is. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's generally what we're hearing. Again, no two students will be identical in their approach, and I can imagine that we'll have some insights in the comment sections and things like that. But generally, the overwhelming insights are exactly as you highlighted. It's that minimum of financial security as a minimum wage.
This is awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to sort of get out, or anything else you wanted to share with the listeners and share with me?
Yeah, one thing that we're hearing as well from a few students that I was eager to share as well is this interest in learning about hiring trends before even that you enter law school. A lot of students aren't aware of which practice areas more in demand, which practice areas are more rife with unpaid placements versus others. And so I think if the LSO found an opportunity to collect some data on that and share it with students, I think that would also be in the best interest of students who may think they want to become a lawyer and then see the data and be like, oh, maybe it's not the best. And that's again up to every person. And some people are motivated more by their salary than what they'll do with their day to day. But I think the more data we have on what the hiring trends are look like and where they're going, especially post COVID, I think the wiser the decisions will be.
I think that's a fabulous recommendation. I would urge you to send that in to Law Society in a letter, asking them to consider tracking that and publishing any information they can. And maybe offline, I can give you some contacts as to who to send to. But I think you probably know more people there than I do, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah, and we're in the process of preparing a submission to highlight some of the concerns that students have ahead of the March or the
Yeah.
spring convocation. So we'll make sure to note that as well. And I guess if students that are hearing as well, I'll plug that in, have some additional insights, disagree with some of the remarks that we're hearing from other students or things like that, they should definitely pop into our website or to our feedback survey link and
Where can they reach you? Let's do that so they understand where to reach you.
Definitely. So we have our website, lsso.ca, where they can find our feedback form and subscribe to our mailing list. They can also find us on Twitter, LSSONT, or Facebook, LSSONT, and pop in there, click our forms, or just send us a message directly.
All right, that's great. I there was another comment I was going to make for something else you had said. Oh, and on the hiring trends, do you guys conversely, do you track the preferred area of practice in your surveys? Do you ask that question, or where do what area of law or type of law do you plan to practice when you get out? Is that a
So we currently are tracking where you're currently planning to practice in terms of if you've secured one, but that's a great suggestion to add to our
yeah
feedback to see where students are, if they know. But at the end of the day, students really don't know yet anything because they're, from contracts, first year contracts, you might fall in love with it, but then realize you really don't like it once you're in practice. So it will be interesting to see what.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think most people go into law school with an idea of what what area they'd like to work in. They get out and experience different things that might change a bit, and then maybe they get to it later, or they get to some different version of it, down the road. And for me, certainly that's what happened. And I think depends on the mentor and principal you have. If they're excited about what they do, it makes the experience all the more better, or all the better for it, kind of thing. But that's great. Okay, good. So they can reach out to the LSSO. We've got their website. You'll send me that. I'll put your website and info in as well. Anything else we want to share at this point?
Otherwise,
Convocation. So sorry, before I forget, convocation. So from my understanding, this will be coming back to convocation for a vote. Convocation is the big board meeting held by the benchers, the Law Society, and that'll be, I thought it was February. It'll likely be another date, maybe April. Is that what you're hearing? Because there's a submission deadline.
I believe so. We have on our website listed the email if students want to send their own submissions directly to the benchers, and that deadline is March 15th. So I presume it'll be afterwards. And I'd also encourage students who are interested in kind of taking part to pop into convocation. We'll share the link once it's up and running, and you'll be able to see what's going on live and kind of be part of it, even though it's likely going to be digital.
I think it's great. I think at a minimum, if you send an email, I know the benchers receive them. I know that we read them. I know that everyone cares deeply about what we're doing. So they will listen and take everything into consideration. So please, take Ocean up on that and do it. Log into convocation. You might enjoy it. You might find it boring. I don't know. Maybe it'll help you sleep, but it is very interesting to see. And remember that no matter what, as students, you will be lawyers. And in the next year, there are benchers that will want you to vote for them in an upcoming bencher election. So you will likely be paying attention to these, developments and see, what happens and understand the issues a little better. The debates are usually pretty lively, and you get a good cross section of views, which is great, which is exactly what we want. A little bit of acceptance of other people's views, but ultimately the majority rule. So,
And I believe, so elections are coming up next year. I believe if you're currently an articling student, you'll already be eligible to run as a bencher. So for anyone listening and passionate about LSO governance, there's your
yes,
chance.
yes, it's a great chance. And reach out to Alexander Wilkes. He is the youngest bencher in history. So for the 250 years that we've had, a law society when it was formed in the late 1700s, he, in the last 3 years, in his election, was the youngest bencher. So really proud of that. And so you've got some target to beat.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ocean. I really appreciate it. And I will post all the links up in our in the posting so everyone can get in touch with you. And again, thank you again for the time on this.
Thanks so much for having me, and looking forward to connecting again.
Thanks. Thank you.